welcome everyone to our plenary. Thank you for coming. We have a wonderful speaker lined up. Nkechi Taifa is going to share some insights from her work, her experiences. And if you would like to check out her book, it is the link is in the chat, as well as in the PDF of the program guide. And now I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so very much, Amber. And really, thank you, Society for Community Research and Action, for inviting me to a keynote as part of your 2001 biennial conference. I'm really especially excited because of the theme that uprooting white supremacy. This is the absolute first time anyone has invited me to speak about white supremacy. So I'm really excited. So what did I do? I went and consulted the work of one of my colleagues, Tim Wise, the country's most prominent white anti-racist educator, to see just what he had to say about the subject. And he basically focused on white denial. And Tim Wise said that white denial is an American tradition, and it is time to bury it. But in response, I say, Tim, rather than bury it, I think what we need to do is open up the casket. But what I loved about Tim Wise was that he called upon us to remember the movie, The Matrix. I don't know if you remember The Matrix, where Keanu Reeves plays Neo and Lawrence Fishburne plays Morpheus. And there's this scene where Morpheus offers Neo 2 pills. He offers him a blue pill and he offers him a red pill. And he says, you take the blue pill and the story ends. And you wake up and you remain oblivious and you don't have to know what's really going on. You know, just like most white people in this society, they don't want to know what's really happening. And they remain oblivious, despite racism, despite white supremacy, despite all the evidence. Or he said, you take the red pill. And he said, this is Morpheus speaking, I can offer you enlightenment and take you down the rabbit hole and show you just how far it goes. So of course, Neo takes the red pill and he starts to see all the stuff that's going on that he never really knew anything about. And that is how identity functions in this country. You see, when you're a member of a dominant group, you have the luxury and you have the privilege of being in the blue pill. But if you are the target of oppression, you got to take that red pill just to figure out what's going on. So that's why when those of us with the red pill say, hey, y'all, you see all this racism? Look at that mob up there in the Capitol, you know, and then others say, racism? What racism? I don't see any racism. Those were peaceful patriots up there. You see, those people grew up with the blue pill. They were blind to reality. So anti-racist author Tim Wise tells us that no matter the year, no matter the conditions of life in America for Black folk, that white people have rarely ever believed racism to be much of a problem. Nothing shocking there, he says. You see, whenever a system works to your benefit, taking the system for granted becomes second nature. You don't see what others who are harmed by a white supremacist system sees because you don't have to. You were born with the blue pill. You see, back during the enslavement era, Tim Wise tells us that most slave owners never questioned people, never questioned the legitimacy of this system. And most whites, including those who did not own slaves, neither joined the abolitionist movement nor supported it. Indeed, most whites, he continues, have been aligned with white supremacy for the entirety of the nation's history, only condemning even its most blatant iterations like slavery and indigenous genocide many generations after the formal manifestations of those had ended, and when doing so took no more courage than crossing the street. Okay, I know. So no, I know it sounds harsh, but just because truth is not pleasing to one's ears does not make it any less accurate. And in fact, the fact is, most white Americans have never believed that it was necessary for Blacks to agitate for their rights or their lives, at least not at the time when the particular agitation was happening. Oh, sure, 50 years later, we can look back and view Dr. King as a secular saint and talk about how great the civil rights movement was. But when Dr. King and that movement were actually doing the things for which we remember them, I'm really serious, y'all. Most white people stood in firm opposition, saw no need for their actions, and believed that he and the civil rights movement were more divisive than unifying. Black Lives Matter, defund the police. Okay. But what can one say, Tim Wise asked, what can one say? What can one say about a group of people so utterly divorced from reality of the most blatantly unjust periods in American history at a time when the images of racial injustice were beamed into their living rooms night after night at the height of one of the greatest freedom movements, the civil rights movement in history? What can we say of a people who can stare at those images and hear the words spoken by Black people fighting for their lives, for their rights, for their dignity, as those people are beaten and killed and jailed, men, women, and children, dogs and fire hoses, and they turn away or deny that what they are seeing and hearing is real? Just as today, when the world sees in living color the violent terrorism and horrific insurrection on the governmental seat of power of the country, and policymakers still blatantly deny its existence, what can be said about people who, despite otherwise being functional, able to hold down jobs and raise children, feed their dogs, were and so are so totally incapable of understanding the nature of the system under which they live and live? It's because of this. That blue pill of forgetfulness, of oblivion, of privilege. Tim Wise says that he knows one thing that can be said for certain. He said, this is Tim Wise talking, not Nkechi Taifa. He said we should not trust the judgment of such a people as this on any matter of social importance. And when those same people's children and grandchildren, 50 years later, with that same blue pill, manifest the same unwillingness to see, their judgment must be rejected as well. Such denial of reality, Wise analyzes, is a form of white supremacy handed down intergenerationally. At every juncture of history, Black folk awakened by the red pill. Black folk have said, we have a problem, Houston, we got a problem. Meanwhile, most whites have sucked on that blue pill and said, no, all is well. By now, however, it must be evident that this denial must be a genuine character flaw. And until these white lies about the country's history, this white supremacy, until it is opened up, until it is confronted, until it is uprooted, until it is dismantled, Black lives will continue to be endangered. Much of the information about the enslavement period and its continuing vestiges and the role of culpable parties have been intentionally buried for a very long time. And I mean, honestly now, people, honestly, prior to just last week, how many of you have really even ever heard of Juneteenth and knew what it was, other than mainly in passing? And I'm talking about white folk and Black folk. Put it in the chat, y'all. Yes or no, was Juneteenth a surprise to you? Be honest. Half of the people I know said they woke up and there was a national holiday they hadn't even asked for and didn't even know too much about it, but it was there. Put it in the chat, yes or no. But, you know, Juneteenth, what about the slaughter in Tulsa, Oklahoma? The first aerial assault on U.S. soil, which left over 300 Black people dead and 40 square blocks of exclusively Black businesses and homes and schools obliterated. Be honest now. Prior to a couple of months ago, had you ever heard of Tulsa? You can't even turn on the TV now without seeing something about Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the bombing of Black Wall Street. But did you know about it a year ago? Why? Why not? You probably still know about the 1919 terrorism that ravaged Elaine, Arkansas, where Black folk were just talking about unionizing to protect just a modicum of sharecropped earnings. In the chat, y'all, Elaine, Arkansas, 1919, you heard of that one? You know, and they talk about wanting to take Black history out of the schools. Give me a break. What about the 1898 racial insurrection and coup d'etat in Wilmington, North Carolina? There's a documentary on it called Wilmington on Fire. Check it out. I didn't even know about it a couple of years ago. I just found out, me, Miss Black Power, you know, Black history, this, that, and the other. I had never heard about what happened in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898 till I saw that documentary, Wilmington on Fire. What about the massacre in Rosewood, Florida? The only reason I knew about the Rosewood Massacre was because John Singleton, bless his soul, he has passed on, did a movie about it called Rosewood. But you might have missed that one as well. I still don't know that much about the Ocoee. I can't even pronounce it, O-C-O-E-E, because I haven't heard it in the media. O-C-O-E-E, Florida, the 1920 election day bloodbath. Open up this casket, people. You know, who's going to swallow that red pill? Who's going to swallow it and open up those caskets? Have you heard about the remnants from the slave ship Clotilda, discovered just a couple of years ago? I only knew about it because my next door neighbor, when I was in college, became a deep sea diver. His organization was called Diving with a Purpose, and they dove down in the ocean and found the remains of this slave ship. But what was important about it? You see, in 1808, the slave trade was supposed to have been abolished. The Atlantic slave trade, the domestic, the Atlantic slave trade was abolished because they had perfected breeding in this country. So they didn't need to bring Black folk over from Africa anymore. But in contravention of the law, this ship called the Clotilda, 1860, 5 years before the 13th Amendment, illegally transported Africans from Africa to Mobile, Alabama. Okay? And it's past time that all of this information be unburied and bring out to the public. Everywhere, almost every day, there's popping up information, caskets being opened up all over the country with this history just pouring out. And again, they're talking about clamping down and not allowing Black children and white children to know about these things. This isn't Black history. This is American history. In my speeches and in my presentations, I often quote the words of Mamie Till Mobley, the mother of 14-year-old Emmett Till from Chicago, who in 1955 was abducted by white terrorists from bed while visiting his great uncle in Money, Mississippi. He was tortured and lynched and dumped into Mississippi's Tallahatchie River. The only way her sons, beaten and horribly disfigured body, the only way it could be identified was because of a ring that he wore on his finger. His mama, Mamie Till, refused a closed casket. You see, she believed in that red pill. She said, I don't want to bury his memory under the rug. She stated emphatically, I want to open up that casket. Open it up, she demanded. I want the world to see what they did to my boy. And just as that casket was opened up for the world to see what was done to Emmett Till, this biennial conference, with its beautifully audacious theme, uprooting white supremacy, is opening up the casket of the legacy of white supremacy and juxtaposing it to its key areas of policy, education, research, and practice. Red pill. I have mentioned but a mere microcosm of genocidal acts perpetrated by both private individuals and public officials against descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States, which have left in their aftermath Black people and once thriving communities uprooted, terrorized, traumatized, and scared physically, mentally, economically, generationally. And don't get misguided by the myth that's put out there. That's the rape of a white woman that's caused the lynchings. Oh, no. Economic envy. In just about each of these instances, Black people have been seeking economic ascendancy, and in many cases, surpassing their white counterparts. And the jealousy was there, saying, we're not going to allow this to happen. We are the ones who are supposed to be on top, not you. Black people, incredibly, have had to stomach official sanctioned denial about white terrorism for centuries. We didn't even use that word together, white and terrorism. No, because we didn't look about that in this country. No, that's for other people, other countries, Muslims and all like that. Yeah, not here in the United States. And I'm talking about really before January 6th. So hopefully after January 6th, even the FBI now is saying that white terrorism is the greatest threat, in the United States. But what January 6th did indisputably reveal that white terrorism and white rage can no longer be ignored, marginalized, or diminished. There are many reasons for the white rage of the Capitol siege at the beginning of the year. One reason, Black and progressive people won fundamental battles in America, from the ballot box to the White House. That's why the white supremacist blue pill casket opened up, and the Proud Boys and the QAnons and the Tea Parties and the Boogaloo Boys and all the other thugs came running out. You see, they saw the handwriting on the wall, heralding the beginning of the end of white majority rule. And they were enraged because they fear this coming reckoning. I can't even say the word reckoning. They fear this reckoning. Yeah, I can't say it because we don't talk about it much. When have we talked about a real reckoning here in this country? I couldn't even get it out of my mouth. Reckoning, enraged, because they see people no longer being anesthetized by the blue pill. They feel our wokeness and our forward movement. They still mad. Because we had a Black president. They live it because we have a Black Asian female vice president. This is what is behind the fear that we see on outrageous display. the false belief that white people are superior to others and must therefore dominate other races is finally being debunked. And it is past time that that historic casket be opened to the truth. And the truth is, Black people in the United States have suffered one of the worst humanitarian disasters ever. The illegal kidnapping, cultural assault, forced free labor, all of this followed by convict leasing, peonage system, chain gangs, Black codes, crooked sharecropping, stripped of the promised 40 acres, denied the benefits of the Homestead Act, victimized by apartheid, Jim Crow segregation, white supremacist terrorism, massacred wholesale Black enclaves, relegated to substandard housing, exacerbated by redlining, denied the benefits of the GI Bill, subjected to inferior and false education, inundated with disparate health care, imperiled to a mass incarceration unmatched in the world, economically dispossessed, disenfranchised, and still being subjected today, right now, to gerrymandering and blatant voter suppression, just to name a few. Or in other words, Black people have been and are not only subject to so-called white supremacy, but have been and also are the victims of genocide. Okay, so now I know y'all don't like Black folk using that term. You might have think I've gone just a little bit too far, but let's not get it twisted and think that that term is solely reserved for the Jewish Holocaust or the native peoples of this land. Because when one examines the international definition of genocide, which has been codified in US law, in the US Code, we see that its applicability is far more expansive than that blue pill has led us to believe. Permit me just a moment to pop that woke red pill in my mouth and open up the casket and break it down. You see, the International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide states that genocide is a crime, whether committed in time of peace or in war, which the parties agree to prevent and punish. The international definition of genocide, again codified in US law, is the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, number one, killing members of the group. Number two, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Number three, inflicting upon the group conditions of life calculated to bring about their destruction in whole or in part. Number four, taking measures to prevent births within the group. Number five, forcibly transferring children from one group to the other. That is the definition of genocide, but it goes further. It says that genocide is not the only actionable act. Conspiracy to commit genocide, directing public incitement to commit genocide, intent to commit genocide, and complicity in its commission. And then there is the critical accountability. It states that those guilty of genocide shall be punished, regardless of whether they are constitutionally protected rulers, public officials, or private citizens. We really need to unpack and open up that casket. That is not the white ethnocentric education that I was taught in the United States. I didn't learn that in law school either, even though the convention was being discussed and debated on the Senate floor during the time when I was in law school. I had to find this out on my own and make the analysis and the connections. We're not taught these things. And so we don't connect the dots and we don't make the connections. You see, my people, when Michelle Alexander wrote The New Jim Crow, and put it in the chat, if you've heard of The New Jim Crow or Michelle Alexander, I don't know, I'm in the criminal justice realm. So, that's a book that if this were convening of criminal justice professionals, I know you all are psychology, but if you've heard of The New Jim Crow, say yes, no, whatever. Yeah, I've heard of it, bought it years ago. You see, Michelle Alexander analyzed the criminal punishment system as a new system of control. My position is that is correct. But while enlightening and shoving that red pill down our throats to make sure that we understood what was going on today with the criminal punishment system, I submitted that we must not get too comfortable with the Jim Crow analogy to mass incarceration, because I felt it could be just too limiting. What I said is that we must push the envelope and open up the casket even further to illuminate more concretely the severity of the problem facing Black communities. And that's when I formulated what I call the Taifa theory of institutionalized genocide as a framework through which to analyze the evolving jurisprudence of international human rights doctrine to selected conditions confronting Black people in the United States. Thus, I use the term institutionalized genocide. My terminology, it's neither radical banking, nor was it rank rhetoric. Rather, it methodically uses that international and US adopted definition, which I spoke of, as a lens to scrutinize the impact of white supremacy on society today, and in particular, my focus was the criminal punishment system, though other systems such as education or health or economics, etc., could likewise be so scrutinized. It is my feeling that the heightened nomenclature of genocide should shock the public into sparking a real revolution in changing systemic and white supremacist policies and practices, as opposed to settling into yet another shift in focus to a still newer system of blue pill control. And perhaps we may need to open up that casket just a bit wider and ask, can the United States government abide by the mandates that a global framework to justice presents? Or are we once again relegated to Dred Scott justice, where the human rights of African descendant people are not bound to be respected? Open up that casket. And if you don't know just who Dred Scott was, then you really need to demand correct and true history of the United States, and that these things not be taken out of the classrooms and that our memories not be erased. You see, that everything that has been buried be brought out into the open, and that those blue pills forever be smashed and flushed from our bodies and from our minds and from our souls, so that we can finally, once and for all, escape the matrix. One of the problems and why I felt it necessary to coin it as institutional genocide as opposed to just genocide is because of the problem with US law of the requirement, and I'm a lawyer, of having to prove intent. You know, and although laws today are facially neutral and supposedly do not intentionally discriminate, though that's kind of seems like it's changing again now, disparate treatment is often ingrained within the fabric of social institutions, allowing discrimination to occur without the need for action by a specific person. You see, the concept of white supremacy and today's racism in many ways is subtle and is structurally embedded in many police departments and prosecutor offices and courtrooms. It's found in laws and policies that look fair, but nevertheless have a racially discriminatory and genocidal impact. The long range implications of what is increasingly becoming the criminalization of a race, the long range implications are shuddering. Mass incarceration with lengthy sentences invariably results in the disruption and in the disintegration of families, in the destabilization of communities, and in diminished life prospects, measures which combine to incarcerate generations. Any consideration of the impact of mass incarceration and racism, any impact that fails to take into account the role of institutionalized genocide and racism is an insufficient analysis, and any remedy that does not acknowledge the understanding that racism manifests in various forms is deficient. It's a deficient analysis. My specialty, as I said, has been that of the criminal punishment system. Year after year, century after century, Although the players change and the scene shifts, the script irrefutably remains the same. Unequal justice. Doesn't matter whether the issue of vigilantism or police brutality or prosecutorial abuse or unjust sentencing. As a race, Black people have been subjected to a double standard of justice. Just think if what happened on January 6th had been a whole mob of Black folk. I mean, come on, y'all, just, blue pill, come on. You don't even need to have swallowed the blue pill to visualize. Well, first of all, they wouldn't even have made it that far. So, I mean, this is academic musing right here. They would have been gunned down before they even, got close. We need to open up these caskets because the names and the groups and the events spanning the decades are legion. From way back at the time of the Scottsboro Boys, if you remember that, Emmett Till, I spoke about, the Black Panther Party, the Attica Rebellion, Eleanor Bumpers, Michael Stewart, Amadou Diallo, Abner Luina, Johnny Gammons, Sean Bell, Jenna Six, Troy Davis, Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Ayanna Jones, Freddie Gray, Rekia Boyd, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Sandra Bland, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. The list is endless. I stopped counting. I don't even know no more names after that because it's just too many. You can put them in the chat if you know them. I don't even know them. I have to, it's too much. Trauma porn, y'all. Trauma porn. And I got to watch the news because I got to comment on stuff. Y'all should psychoanalyze that. Having to watch that trial day after day, So anyway, you see, those with the blue pill thought what was happening with the police was justice. Where in actuality, for those of us forced to consume the red pill of reality, it was just us. Open up that casket. And that brings me to someone who I feel has never gotten her due. Someone I don't see quoted by Robin DiAngelo's excellent analysis of white fragility, or by the iconic Jane Elliott of the blue eyes, brown eyes childhood experiment. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it up. Oh my God, I was so mesmerized by Jane and that experiment she did with school children and the empathy and the results, the racism, the blue pillism of our children, the children of this country. So Google that up, Jane Elliott. But I didn't see this person quoted by DiAngelo, Jane Elliott, or even by my beloved diversity guru, Tim Wise. I just love that man. But her name was Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, an African-American psychiatrist before her times, a physician who was both vilified by both whites and Blacks, and whose tenured position at Howard University was not renewed as a result of her philosophies. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, someone who predicted the election of Donald Trump before his victory, and who died before seeing her prediction become a reality. Someone who popularized the coining of the concept white supremacy, but never got to see that term become mainstream parlance. If you've heard of her, put it in the chat. This is a convenient psychologist. I'm going to presume you have, but actually you probably haven't. In 1970, she published a small but power-packed pamphlet called The Cress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism, White Supremacy, a Psychogenetic Theory and World Outlook. It was definitely red pill, in your face, bold and bodacious. I told you her contract wasn't renewed, even at Howard University. So what was her premise? Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's premise was that racism was not simply a pattern of individual and of institutional practice, but indeed a universally operating system of white supremacy rule and domination in which the effective majority of the world's white population participate. Welsing described racism as a conspiracy to ensure white genetic survival. That genocide of people of color is caused by whites' inability to produce melanin. And that the cause of societal issues is white supremacy genetic deficiency. Her theory of color confrontation and racism postulated that issues can be explained on the basis of the core psychological sense of the color deficient numerical inadequacy state which white or whiteness represents. She analyzed the individual patterns of behavior, which in the course of time evolved into collective, social, institutional, and now systemic patterns making up the system of white supremacy, which operates at a universal level, and she submits is the only effective and functional racism existent in the world today. Her theory gave people of color throughout the world a rational basis for understanding the motivational nuances of individual and collective white behavior. Stated Dr. Welsing, quote, whether the white peoples of the world can accept this analysis of the white problem in human relations is not for me to answer. I do know that the massive majority of the people in the world are looking for an answer to the dilemma that was once called the American dilemma. They are looking for a change. End of quote. I say perhaps, just perhaps, the Cress theory of color confrontation and racism should be dusted off to help make that change. It's controversial, y'all. Even for some Black folk, it's controversial. But I think it bears scrutiny, particularly in this age where it was her term. This is the first person I ever heard use the term white supremacy that everybody is talking about today. So let me just get personal for a moment. As a teenager, I used to sell Black Panther newspapers on the streets of Washington, D.C. I knew, or at least I thought I did, about slavery and that we had been kidnapped and brought to this country and stripped of our language and our culture and our heritage, and raped, tortured, subjected to inferior education, bad housing, mediocre healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. I knew that there was a straight line that connected the past and the present, but it was only later that I learned that the blood trail of the American wing of the slave trade led straight to respectable U.S. institutions such as banks and universities and religious institutions and insurance companies and newspapers, all of which made enormous profits over African misery. And in all my pain, I found in that paper one word, a magic word, one word more powerful to me than Shazam or abracadabra or open sesame. It was a word that gave my pain definition, and it was subsumed within point number 3 of the Black Panther Party's 10-point program, and that word was reparations. The 40 acres and a mule promises restitution for slave labor and mass murder of Black people. To find a word, a term one is searching for, imbues a person with a new purpose. And it did that for me as a teenager. Reparations, the word itself is hot, it's scalding. And at one time, it was unthinkable by mainstream America as viable public policy, yet it's only a question. Should the United States pay government reparations to the descendants of Africans held as slaves? Just a question Congressman John Conyers would muse decades later. He said, we ask questions about everything, what's in the space, what's underneath the water. Interesting questions, he would say to me, but this one has been studiously avoided. Why? The answers may be because few questions challenge society to consider 400 years of slavery all at once, of history all at once, to tunnel within our souls and to discover what we truly believe about race and about equity and about the value to be placed on human sufferings. Why shouldn't Why shouldn't the great-great-grandchildren of those who were stripped of humanity, language, and culture, repeatedly raped and bred, forced to labor for free, tortured, horrifically lynched, and on and on and on, why should not our people be compensated? Well, what about me? I'm innocent. And I should not be liable for things that happened 100 years ago. That was my great-grandfather. Anyway, I'm a liberal. I voted for Obama. Well, my response, we all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. Although the present generation of whites may be innocent of what their forefathers and their foremothers did, as a people, they're in a privileged position as a result of the actions of their predecessors. Each generation passes its debts as well as its assets on to the next generation. The heritage which whites enjoy in this country is what has been called white skin privilege. Benefiting from a state, a society, economic structure which is governed by white supremacy. And although we may debate methods of operationalizing this data for measurement, there is no question that Caucasians in this country enjoy the fruits of 400 years of unjust enrichment as a result of the stolen labor of African people. But you ask one question and it invariably leads to another and yet another and then a few more. Why should white American taxpayers who never enslaved people or lynched people, never participated in redlining, why should they pay for the sin of ancestors they never knew? What about those whites whose ancestors arrived long after chattel enslavement period? Why should the federal government pay? What about corporations, religious and academic institutions, private estates? Hasn't the United States already paid reparations through affirmative action? What type of price tag should be put on over 2 centuries of legalized inhumanity? What about Oprah? Does she get a check? You know, y'all, if nothing else, one answer is crystal clear. Reparations is a well-established principle of both domestic and international law, which the United States is very much well aware of and has participated in. In fact, reparations were paid. They were paid. Reparations were paid at the end of the enslavement era. They just weren't paid to the formerly enslaved. Reparations were paid to the slaveholders, the former masters. Read the history. Open up the casket. I submit that reparations as the solution for an official reckoning of the past is essential to the uprooting of white supremacy and the remedy to equitably address its many indices still manifest today. It must be recognized, however, that reparations is not solely an economic concept. It's a political one as well, and cultural one, and psychological one. The harms were multifaceted. Thus, the remedies must be multifaceted as well. Reparatory justice is not just limited to stolen labor, but for our stolen lives as well. Unjust war, cultural aggression. You see, the political essence of slavery is not just founded in the economic exploitation of labor, but also in the illegal imposition of US jurisdiction on the enslaved and her descendants. It can never be overemphasized that Black people are on this soil as the result of warfare supported by the United States and other nations, and are here as the result of a vicious colonization, cultural and physical rape, economic exploitation under chattel and mental bondage and terror. That is the historical white supremacist record and the full ramifications of this record, whose caskets we are still opening up, must not be endlessly ignored. Open up that casket. And what is the value of the destruction wreaked by US against Blacks? I'm a founding member of an organization named COBA, the National Coalition of Blacks Reparations in America. I'm an inaugural member of NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission. I learned from one of our commissioners, the late psychiatrist, Dr. Nana Pat Newton, as well as the psychologist, Dr. Joy DeGruy. If you've heard of any one of those, put it in the chat. They're both African American, Joy DeGruy wrote Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And I learned from them about the concept of generational trauma and transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. The trauma, my brothers and sisters, travels within the DNA, and these modified genes are passed down intergenerationally. What am I talking about? In a study of third-generation Holocaust survivors, researchers found that they had inherited genes that had been transformed as a result of their ancestors' trauma. Consequently, it was found that some descendants of the Holocaust survivors had different stress hormone profiles. Some were more susceptible to anxiety disorders and on and on. Hello? What about Black folk? Black folk have inherited centuries of trauma as a result of not only the enslavement era, but also everything else, all of which correlates with negative health outcomes and other issues. We really need to open up that casket. There are reasons why Black folk are dying disproportionately from the coronavirus. And if you're wondering just what type of intergenerational trauma I'm talking about, just a glance at some of the headlines of Ralph Ginsburg's 100 years of lynchings will make your blood boil. And I'm not going to go through it because I think we've had enough trauma porn right now, because it's talking about lynchings and being tortured and anatomy being cut out and swimming from trees. And I don't want to get into that. Make sure you go down to Montgomery, Alabama. Please have one of your biennials down there when everything opens back up, to Brian Stevenson's Legacy Museum and Lynching Memorial. If you've been there, if you know about it, Brian Stevenson, Montgomery, Alabama, put that in the chat. Have a conference down there. Open up that casket down there. Just as there's no statute of limitations on addressing human rights violations, debts are neither absolved nor diminished by the passage of time. In fact, over time, unpaid debts go larger with added interest. Anti-slavery orator and abolitionist Frederick Douglass once said, he's one of my favorites, he said, power concedes nothing without a demand. And we are demanding no more white supremacist terrorists. We are demanding no more white fragility. Y'all with me? We're demanding no more transgenerational trauma. We are demanding no more Black-white wealth gap. We are demanding no more denials and white lies. No more benefits from white privilege. No more mass incarceration. No more medical apartheid. No more attacks on voting rights. No more blue pill of forgetfulness. The National African American Reparations Commission's preamble asserts that no amount of material resources or monetary compensation, no amount, can ever be sufficient restitution for the spiritual, mental, cultural, and physical damages and genocide inflicted on Africans and their descendants by centuries of the Ma'afa, M-A-A-F-A, you can look it up, Ma'afa of enslavement down through today. We are talking about crimes against humanity that must be reckoned with. But who's going to break all this down? To the Karens and the Beckys and the Tommies and the Dicks of white communities. If you consider yourself anti-racist, they need you. They need your mentorship. They need your guidance. They need your prayers. They need your solutions. They're sitting right next to you in your pews, in your synagogues. They're peering through the Venetian blinds of their windows, watching the multiracial demonstrators with their signs. Black Lives Matter. What do we want? Freedom. When do we want it? Now. Defund the police. Reparations now. They need your leadership, your courage, your vision, your faith, and they need to be part of a movement. You see, Rosa Parks went to jail. That's the easy one. Rosa Parks in the chat. I want to see a whole lot of yeses. Rosa Parks went to jail. But there was a movement led by a young minister, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that not only got her out of jail, but put a set of circumstances in motion that changed the landscape of America. Open up the casket. I've been a part of movements my entire life. Shameless plug. I write about it in my book, Black Power, Black Lawyer, Black Power Movement, the Black Studies in the Classrooms movements, the anti-apartheid movement, the movement to free political prisoners, the reparations movement, the movement against mass incarceration. I mean, there are a whole lot of movements I know y'all have been part of too. The women's movement, the LGBTQ movement. I mean, there's so many movements out there. This biennial could not have come at a more critical time because we are witnessing the dawning of a new movement. Nothing radical, but an anti-racist movement that recognizes that Black lives must matter. Uprooting white supremacy, my colleagues. Uprooting white supremacy. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be nice. I know a lot of the stuff I talked about today wasn't pretty and wasn't nice. And I'm surely not telling you that the anti-racist journey will be easy. My quest for justice surely has not been. But whenever times are hard, whenever I feel stumped, what I do, I remember the demand from my #1 great heroine, Harriet Tubman, as she led over 300 people out of enslavement. She simply told her people to keep going. If you hear the dogs, she demanded, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, she said, keep going. If they're shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop, she commanded. If you feel tired, keep going. If you need some encouragement, keep going. If you're struggling to rid yourself of white privilege, hallelujah, keep going. If you want to be anti-racist, keep going. If you want to eliminate systemic racism, keep going. If you need some equity, if you need some healing, if you need that justice, keep going. Keep going, y'all. Keep going till that casket is bust wide open and that blue pill, that blue pill of white supremacy is cast asunder. Keep going. Thank you. So I'm not sure if I think we might have time for 1 or 2 questions. I don't know. I do want to take a look at all of the chats. In fact, I'm going to save the chat so I can print it out so I can see what we do and what we didn't know, who was here and who was not there and all that. So I don't know if there's a question, Amber. I don't know if,
Yeah, because I know we're short on time. Is there anyone that has a question and can raise their hand?
Well, at least I just gave some food for thought. we can chew on it if we spit that blue pill out of our mouth, right?
Or if you have the question, if you want to put it in the chat, that's another option as well.
Oh, I see. Somebody's got Joy DeGrue here. Could not put it down. DeGrue, yes. All right. Cress's theory is distinct from Eliot's. Okay. Reference, I'm going from up to down. Sharing the classes. Not familiar with her. Not familiar. Ava DuVernay, the 13th. Yes. War on drugs. Children. Something was part of high school. Okay. Well, they changing that though. Yeah, okay. So 14 new messages. My goodness.
Any questions from anyone?
I see a raised hand. Falami Prescott Adams has her hand raised.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, there you are. Up there. Hi.
Thank you. My question is about these resolutions and this idea of, someone trying to say we can't teach the truth. How much energy do you think we should spend? Because it feels like it's important to fight it, but it also feels like a distraction. So what do you think about that?
I think that the focus and emphasis on critical race theory is a distraction. And I say that because critical race theory isn't taught in the lower levels. Critical race theory is like master's degree and all that. It was law school, it was critical legal studies that came out of that. What the real danger, I think, is in the lower levels where they're really talking about a whitewashing of history, which really isn't different from the history I grew up with. I grew up in grade school and junior high school in the 60s. And none of this was part of the history books. It appears as if going back to that period when I thought that we had advanced far from it. I came up during the time when Black Studies in the late 60s was just coming into the classrooms, and I ran to take it because I wanted to know about my history and my culture and all like that. So, Falami, I guess that's a good point that you raised. What I'm just apprehensive about is that people are not going to have tools with this to fight. And Carter G. Woodson said, if you control a person's thinking, you don't have to worry about their action. And what they're trying to do is control the thinking. And we need to break loose from that. If you have I'd like to hear your opinion on that, about the distraction part, because there are always other reasons why things are being done. So let me hear that, any analysis that you may have.
Well, the thing is, the resolution just happened in Georgia, and I read it, and what's so crazy about it is it says we shouldn't teach anything that makes a student feel bad and at fault for what has happened in history. It's just a ridiculous, to really read it, it's crazy. And so for some reason, it made me want to, I have all the board meetings on my calendar. I've posted about it. I'm interviewing the Georgia Teacher of the Year who's on it, but it feels like a distraction because I have work to do. And so I don't know the answer. And then some people, including my own husband, said, what do you expect? Of course that's going to happen. And I think if we keep expecting it and don't fight it in an organized way, that's a mistake, but it still feels like a distraction. So I know that's not that's the tension that I've been feeling.
Let me just say one thing, because I know time is tight. I think it is quite ironic, however, that we had a unanimous Senate and a near unanimous House passing a bill to acknowledge our federal holiday, Juneteenth, which acknowledged the ending of slavery for people finding out on the furthermost in Texas. So how are you going to even teach about Juneteenth without teaching about what the underlying causes? I don't know about this making people feel bad thing. It's just, it's history. I don't quite know how America thinks. I felt, history is history. And I think it's up to you all, the Society of A, B, C, D, E, whatever, to be able to, to weigh in and break it down and say we have ways of dealing with the psychology of it all. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Yeah. Thank you. So Amber, I think it's 7:00. I think my time is.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much for such a powerful talk. We appreciate your expertise and just being so willing to be so open and transparent with us. And thank you everyone for attending. For those of you that have registered for the conference, you'll be able to access this video as well. And so don't forget to also check out the book. We put the link in the chat a few times. So hopefully you were able to catch that. And you can also reference the program guide if you didn't catch the link to the chat for the book as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And this concludes our session.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.